Conditions in southern Alabama, where authorities say a hydroplaning car likely set off a chain reaction on the interstate. 8 children ages 4 to 17 were traveling in a small bus operated by the Alabama Sheriff's Youth Ranch when it got caught in the pileup. Only the ranch director who was driving survived. She lost 2 of her own children in the crash. The multi-car crash also killing Cody Fox and his 9-month-old daughter Ariana, who were in a separate vehicle.
I've never seen anything like it. It was horrific.
The storm spurred tornadoes too, one touching down in Bruton, Alabama, flattening homes, ripping roofs, and tossing debris for miles.
All of a sudden, the trees over this way, behind the houses over there, they just it was just like they imploded.
High winds and life-threatening flooding also leading to rescues. Dauphin Island's mayor saying they're still feeling the effects from past storms.
We're in a situation that the shoreline is just so decimated at this point that it just takes very little, again, high tides, wave action, to push water into the interior of the island.
The lashing in Louisiana, washing out streets and pushing water into homes.
We had about 4 inches throughout our entire house, and that happened within about an hour.
Along the Florida Panhandle, strong winds and flash floods bringing rough seas and high surf, while fire crews in Georgia rescued a woman trapped inside her car, freeing her from a fallen tree and power lines.
Kathy, tell us more about this likely tornado in Naperville, Illinois, and the damage that is being reported so far.
Yeah, the information is still coming in. And like you said, this is a reported tornado. So we should know perhaps in the next several hours once folks are on the ground and surveying the damage. But right now we are told that there were several minor injuries as well as some damage to homes in that area as well.
Kathy Parks in Alabama for us. Thank you so much.
Still ahead, a rare bit of good news surrounding Tokyo's embattled Olympic Games.
Coming up, what we're now learning about fans that will be attending the big event. Overnight, there has been an update on whether fans will be allowed into venues at the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo. Organizers have confirmed Japanese spectators will be allowed, setting the limit at 50% of the venue's capacity up to 10,000 people. The Games kick off in just over a month in the capital city, where the Japanese government recently lifted the state of emergency. But Tokyo remains under heavy restrictions ahead of the Olympics as officials warn of a potential coronavirus surge. NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now with the latest from Beijing. Janice, big news this morning. What went into this decision, and how are athletes as well as fans reacting to it?
Well, months of speculation went into this decision, Ellis, and there had been a lot of anticipation because this was seen as a final hurdle for officials. And so with this decision, it looks like there's a boost in certainty that the games will still go ahead despite these lingering concerns. Now, this doesn't affect any foreign visitors. That was determined months ago that there would be no foreign fans allowed into Olympic venues. But it is good news for domestic fans. Officials saying that they will have 50% capacity at each venue to a maximum of 10,000 people. The challenge that they have now, though, is that they pre-sold about 4 million tickets. So it looks like they're going to be putting it all into a lottery system to determine who gets to go to which events. The competition schedule remains unchanged.
And Tokyo, I understand, still has a lot of COVID-19 restrictions in place. What would happen if cases do start to rise before the games begin?
Well, officials were very clear in making this determination today that if another state of emergency was required in order to get COVID infections under control, or if there was other needs beyond their control, that they would look at reevaluating these plans for domestic fans, or scrapping them altogether. We have to remember that the top medical advisor in Tokyo just last week cautioned against having any fans. He said that the safest way to pull off the games would be to have nobody there. And the majority of Japanese are opposed to having the games at all. Polls have been showing roughly 80% of people not wanting the games to happen. Thousands of volunteers have quit. The concern, of course, is that this is going to be a massive super spreader event with thousands of athletes and officials pouring into Tokyo from around the world.
And I mean, you look at Uganda's Olympic team, they just had a member of that team test positive for COVID-19 and they were not allowed into Japan. Is that something that's raising any additional concerns since athletes do not have to be vaccinated?
Well, it's raising concerns because the athlete who tested positive on arrival appears to have been turned back, but teammates who could be considered close contacts were apparently allowed to carry on. So there will be some scrutiny of exactly how officials are going to carry out this screening process. They say that athletes are going to be tested regularly. They have other restrictions in place, like a no socializing policy at the athletes' village. They have a ban on shouting and also rules on wearing masks when traveling between venues. The IOC president at the news conference today said that they are confident in the fact that 80% of athletes and officials who will be staying at the athletes' village will be vaccinated. And they stressed the importance of having spectators watching live for the athletes' self-esteem. Here's more of what he had to say.
So for the residents of the Olympic villages, it will be well above 80%.
So it looks like these games will go ahead. Again, they'll reevaluate things after July 12th, depending on the situation with the spread of COVID-19. But that means that the opening ceremony, Ellison, is just a little over 1 month away.
Hard to believe. Well, Janice, thank you so much for that report. We appreciate it.
Let's get a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
NBC News correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us this morning. Good morning, Raf.
Aaron, Ellison, good morning. Iran has elected hardline cleric Ibrahim Raisi as its next president. Raisi already under U.S. sanctions for human rights abuses, and he was elected on a low turnout Friday after his more moderate rivals were barred from running in the election. He'll be a key player as President Biden tries to revive the Iran nuclear deal. Now, talk about a trial by fire. The U.S. Navy launching live explosives at one of its own aircraft carriers to test how it would fare in an actual battle. They did it by detonating nearly 20 tons of explosives near the USS Gerald R. Ford. The blast so big, it registered as a 3.9 magnitude earthquake. And finally, Usain Bolt, the world's fastest man, is the father of twins. The sprinter announcing on Father's Day his partner had given birth to boys Saint and Thunderbolt. Get it? The family are doing well, and guys, you have to assume that those are going to be some pretty quick kids when they grow up.
With a name like Thunderbolt, you have to.
No pressure, right?
Raf Sanchez for us today. Raf, thank you.
And coming up, the Biden administration's agenda once again being put to the test this week on Capitol Hill.
We'll bring you the latest from inside the Beltway next.
Our world is facing some big challenges. Chuck Todd breaks them down. Every Thursday, a deep dive into a new topic.
Instead of covering all the big stories, we're going to cover one single subject impacting American politics.
Exploring and explaining the critical issues that affect our future. Meet the Press Reports. Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Streaming on NBC News Now. And available next day on demand on Peacock.
In Chicago, a spike in violent crime is being met with a different kind of policing.
NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster shows us how the city's top cop is going all in on efforts to engage the community.
This is what it looks like.
Yeah, this is literally, you're just walking out in the street and you're talking to folks.
It's community policing, and Deputy Chief Angel Navales is charged with refreshing the decades-old concept. The program and its leader getting a major endorsement from Chicago's top cop.
This is a transformative moment for CPD.
A moment that can't come soon enough for a city that's seen shootings spike 43% and murders rise 33% just this year. For Navales, the solution is in the community.
Once you establish relationship with folks, people are, and they trust you, people are more apt to speak to you, to exchange information with you, tell you about problems that sometimes we don't think are police problems, but may lead to police problems.
Chicago's reimagined neighborhood policing initiative pushes officers to break from traditional policing and engage the public, passing out food, coaching sports, and hosting events. It commits 2 officers, or DCOs, to every South and West Side district.
Your job is to proactively, in the field, engage members of the community.
And those 2 officers, that is their only job.
That is their only job, so they're not responsible for radio calls.
And researchers say in its first year, it seemed to be working. Trust in police in the pilot district was on the rise.
The aim is to have the police be responsive to communities. We need the community to say what it wants, and to expect that that's what policing is going to look like.
While the pandemic and protests rolled back initial progress, community leaders assisting the program say they've seen change.
What did it look like before you had DCOs here who you were able to reach out to?
It was just calling, and it was just going into a dead zone.
Fast forward at the pandemic, we're walking with some of the DCOs and 4, 5, 6 people coming up to them, knowing them by name. And, that's what we want.
But Advocacy Director Nicole McBride says she's concerned the program could be expanding too quickly, emphasizing the need for change to last.
Oftentimes what happens, especially in major cities, is that program after program is introduced, then it's defunded or it's forgotten about, or something else becomes the new highlight reel. And so I think that there's skepticism sometimes from community members that their voices actually will be heard this time.
It has been almost 100 days since the shooting spree that left 8 people dead in Atlanta. The attacks drew attention to a rise in anti-Asian violence in the United States. MSNBC anchor Richard Louie went to Georgia to speak with families who are still searching for answers and justice.
The Atlanta shootings, as Reverend Al Sharpton puts it, had the impact of Bloody Sunday on the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And for Asian Americans, the 100-day mark this week is like a first anniversary. We spoke exclusively with 5 of the 8 victims' families. In the case of Bobby Peterson, he drove for hours looking for his mother after he heard her work was attacked. After her death, he moved into his mother's home and invited us in to visit with him.
My mother's name is Young A.U., and she was 63.
My mother's been in the United States since 1982. She met my father in Korea. They're married. And then, like I said, they moved to Fort Benning, Georgia. My friends very much knew that I was black and Korean. And so they knew that it was different, like taking off the shoes in the house and again, eating on the floor, eating with chopsticks. I recently moved into my mother's house. She spoke Korean in the house to her friends, but my brother and I didn't pick up on it. We spoke enough to say hello and bye. But my mother was not a patient woman, so when she said, "Hey, Bobby, are you going to be here at 10 o'clock? At 9 o'clock, she was probably already at the door waiting for me. Right? Her and her dog were waiting for me. And so when she saw my car pull up, they both would be sitting there smiling, waving. Or she would look at me first and she would say, "Bobby, you have lost weight." So I was like, "Mom, what about, a hug?" Or, "Hey, how you doing?" It's hard every time I pull into the complex. Because the day that my mother was killed, I had to look for her. And I had to find out whether it was her or not. And during that day, we were looking for her car. And I drove through the complex.
Through this complex?
Correct. I remember pulling in and anticipating her car being here. Hoping that she was asleep.
hoping that she was here. And so every time I pull in, I remember her car wasn't there. And so I'm reminded of that every single time I pull in. That's when I knew that she wasn't coming back.
Bobby, drawing on his mixed-race background, now says his unique voice can and must do something to bring different communities together, and that the country should not forget this, because he will not, as he grapples with questions about the death penalty, hate crimes, and what this all means for the country.
And you can tune in to watch Remember the Flowers, Atlanta shootings 100 days later, and see Richard's interviews with the 4 other families on NBCnews.com/Asian-America.
In Washington this morning, new developments in the ongoing battle over infrastructure.
President Biden has made it one of his top priorities, and as early as today, he'll be reviewing a potential compromise bill from a bipartisan group of senators, but the support of progressives is not assured. NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett joins us now. Good morning, Jeff.
Hey, Ellison. Good morning. You're right. This week is a pivotal week in terms of President Biden working with congressional Democrats and Republicans, for that matter, to secure agreements on a range of key policy issues, including voting rights reform and infrastructure. But right now, there is no clear path forward for either of these issues. This week, President Biden's agenda being put to the test. First, on infrastructure. As early as today, a group of centrist senators
pledge of having an infrastructure package, but also to keep his pledge of doing things across the aisle and getting something done.
At least 21 Democratic and Republican senators say they support the roughly $1 trillion proposal, which would not raise taxes on corporations or wealthy Americans. The plan would revitalize roads, bridges, and broadband, but would not meet many Democrats' demands for investments in clean energy and social programs. Several progressive senators say the deal doesn't go far enough and disagree over how to pay for it. On Tuesday, the Senate is set for a key vote on a sweeping rewrite of voting and election law. Democrats are coalescing around a compromise offered up by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. His plan would make Election Day a federal holiday, ban partisan gerrymandering, and require voter ID at the polls. Democrats argue access to voting should be expanded. Around the country, Republican state legislators in over a dozen states have enacted laws this year to restrict access to the polls. And Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says federal voting rights legislation is a no-go.
Totally inappropriate. All Republicans, I think, will oppose that as well.
The president facing pressure, both political and personal, with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops voting to move forward with drafting a formal statement on the meaning of communion, which will include whether Mr. Biden and other politicians should be denied the right based on their stance on abortion. President Biden, a devout Catholic who routinely attends Mass, downplayed the issue.
That's a private matter, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Now, President Biden says he personally opposes abortion, but that's not a view he's going to impose on Americans who feel otherwise. Now, as for policy, I have Republican Senator Lindsey Graham telling the president that if he's looking for a bipartisan bill, there's a bipartisan bill available for the taking. But just earlier today, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the White House still needs more details on what's in this bipartisan agreement, and more to the point, how to pay for it. Aaron, Ellison.
All right, Jeff Bennett for us at the White House this morning. Jeff, thank you. Let's go to the Hill now. We're joined by Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell to talk a little bit more about some of the developments happening there. Leanne, I want to start with infrastructure. We just heard in Jeff's piece a little bit about this compromise bill that could be unveiled today, but we also have Senate Democrats who are considering passing a second package using budget reconciliation. Lots of balls in the air right now. What are some of the priorities around that effort, and how likely are progressives to push that through?
That's a great way to put it, Aaron. Lots of balls in the air. And we're waiting to see which one is able to be caught. So first, there's this bipartisan $1 trillion infrastructure bill that We're still waiting. We've been waiting for a couple of weeks on the details, and that's because they're still trying to work them out, including how to pay for it. And the question for that is, are they going to gain the support of 60 senators in order to pass it? They say they have the support of 11 Republicans, which is good. But where do the progressives stand? Let's listen to what Senator Bernie Sanders said on Meet the Press yesterday about this bipartisan package, and we'll talk on the other side.
As I understand it, the so-called bipartisan plan really only provides about 25% of the money that the president asked for, about $580 billion. Nobody really knows what is going to be in this bipartisan agreement and how it is going to be paid for. So if it is roads and bridges, yeah, of course we need to do that, and I support that. If it is regressive taxation, raising the gas tax or a fee on electric vehicles or the privatization of infrastructure, no, I wouldn't support it.
So Democrats, led by Senator Bernie Sanders, are working on this reconciliation package that you mentioned that could be upward of $6 trillion, including traditional infrastructure, elder care, child care, and a whole host of Democratic priorities, Aaron.
Yeah, at the same time, Leanne, voting is also on the agenda this week with Senator Joe Manchin's bill facing a procedural vote on Tuesday. We know this is a more limited bill than what Democrats were proposing. What's the latest there?
That's right. It is more limited. It is an idea by Senator Joe Manchin and his quest to get bipartisan support for voting rights. He is working Republicans extremely hard. I have witnessed this in the halls of the Capitol where he's huddling with Republicans about this legislation. But it is a very, very heavy lift to get Republicans to support this bill or any bill regarding voting rights, as Republicans mostly say that the federal government should not be involved in that. It should be left up to the state. Still, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has promised a vote on this legislation this week, and it's going to be much better for Democrats if they can get Joe Manchin to sign on, and there'd be all Democratic support for this bill. Would be much better than bipartisan opposition against it, Aaron.
Leanne, I want to ask you while I have you, I know President Biden is going to meet with regulators today to get an update on the country's financial picture. What do you know about that meeting?
Well, it is a regular meeting, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the economy, and people are trying to figure out what everything means, especially as Republicans are invoking fears of inflation. There's been a little bit of swing in the stock market, trying to get a sense of what's happening in the unemployment realm. So this is a regular meeting, but it'll be interesting to see what the president says coming out of this meeting and if anything is going to change as far as economic regulatory policy, Aaron.
All right, Leanne Caldwell for us this morning. Leanne, thank you. Well, from infrastructure negotiations to the future of U.S.-Russia relations, Meet the Press prepped us for the week ahead. Moderator Chuck Todd has a look at some of the highlights.
On this week's Meet the Press, we focused on President Biden's first overseas trip, including the summit meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and his domestic diplomacy that he needs to deal with in Washington as the infrastructure negotiations enter that make-or-break phase. Here are some of the most important answers we got from Meet the Press Compressed.
What is in the bipartisan bill in terms of spending is, from what I can see, mostly good. It is roads and bridges, and we need to do that. That is what we are proposing in our legislation, but in much greater numbers. One of the concerns that I do have about the bipartisan bill is how they are going to pay for their proposals. And they're not clear yet. I don't know that they even know yet, but some of the speculation is raising a gas tax, which I don't support, a fee on electric vehicles, privatization of infrastructure. Those are proposals that I would not support.
How committed is this group of 11 Republicans to stick and buy this deal, even if Mitch McConnell says he can't vote for it?
I think we're absolutely committed to it, and I think there's a number of others as well on both sides of the aisle. Last week, I heard from a lot of my colleagues saying, I just need to look at one other issue. You know, can you do this? Can you do that? But there's a lot of interest in having a bipartisan proposal.
What should we watch for to find out whether this summit was a good idea or not?
I think what we'll have to see is whether there are additional meetings at high level
You know, we've heard as we've come out of the summit that there have been some plans for having strategic stability talks. Those are the talks about how we're going to manage our respective nuclear arsenals. But the main problem is really in cyber, which I think you were alluding to in the run-up to this discussion. And that's where we're going to have to see whether we're able to actually sit down and have some serious cyber talks, not just at the working level, but something that takes it up to try to reach some kind of agreement.
There's some concern that we may have given Putin a new status quo. Did Putin get more out of this than we realized?
The symbolism of having a sit down with the American president, absolutely, that is a very important win for Putin. But it's not a win if nothing happens out of it. That is just an episodic event, and, you know, he can't take that to the bank for a long time and cash it in. He's got to basically present himself at home as the great statesman because he himself has to subject his presidency to a re-election.
A judge has blocked the CDC from enforcing coronavirus restriction rules for cruise ships in Florida. It is a big win for the cruise industry, and it comes as Royal Caribbean launched its first trial cruise from Miami to the Bahamas. NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach has more.
For the first time in 15 months, freedom of the seas behind me is hitting the seas. And that's great news for Royal Caribbean and for cruising fans all over the country. But it doesn't come without some controversy. Just this weekend, a federal judge here in Florida decided that the mandates that the CDC puts on cruise lines aren't allowed to be put on cruise lines. And that includes what's happening here, which is a CDC-mandated simulation voyage of the freedom of the seas. What this is going to look like is 600 Royal Caribbean volunteer employees and their guests going on this cruise. It's a 3-day cruise to the Bahamas and to Coco Cay, and they're going to be doing everything a cruise does. They're going to be enjoying the pools, enjoying the arcade, enjoying everything that is on a cruise, but it's going to be looking a little bit different. Just like things are these days, everything happens with a tap of an iPhone app. Instead of the going to a place to learn the safety drill, you're going to be doing it on your iPhone. You learn what a horn sounds like on your iPhone. You're also able to make restaurant reservations on your iPhone. We talked to a number of the employees. Here's what they had to say.
I'm super excited to be back on board and to be the first cruise out of Miami, to be on the simulation cruise, and to say that I was here means a lot to me because that particular ship, I brought her over from Europe on her transatlantic cruise when she was brand new back in 2006.
As an industry, it's important. I mean, we see other industries in the travel sector, like airlines, buses, everything, and we really want to just be the same and be in business.
Now, this is an opportunity for the CDC and for Royal Caribbean to see what works, see what doesn't work, and to fix anything that needs to be changed ahead of the busy summer and fall sold-out months for the cruise line. Now, the general consensus among the medical community is that if you're fully vaccinated, go for it. Go on the cruise, enjoy yourself. But if you're not fully vaccinated, it's especially dangerous to be able to go on the cruise these days, especially considering some of the variants of coronavirus that are out there.
Gary Grumbach reporting there. After a year of virtual learning, a lot of kids and parents are eager to get back to the time-honored tradition of summer sleepaway camp. At the same time, hundreds of camps across the U.S. are struggling to find enough workers. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns went to a camp in rural Pennsylvania for a closer look.
Last summer, 84% of overnight camps in the U.S. weren't able to operate because of COVID-19. The good news is this summer, many of those camps are able to welcome back campers as COVID rates have dropped. But the bad news is a lot of camps are struggling to find enough employees to operate these summer camps. Part of the problem has to do with visas for camp counselors from overseas. For camp director Lauren Rutkowski, preparing to open her sleepaway camp in rural Pennsylvania is always a challenge. But this year, it's been exceptionally difficult.
All over our industry, people are struggling for staff.
Camps across the country rely on international staffers who come on J-1 visas. Camp IHC typically employs nearly 200 counselors from overseas. But this year, the COVID travel ban forced a number of consulates and embassies to stop granting visas, leaving camps like Lauren's struggling to fill vital positions.
How big a portion of your counselors are from overseas? So typically anywhere from 30 to 40% will be international.
How does that compare to what you have this year?
So we've probably cut it in half.
According to Scott Brody, National Board Chair of the American Camp Association, the visa issue has contributed to a national camp crisis.
It's caused some camps to close completely. Other camps are cutting sessions, cutting numbers.
Especially in demand, camp lifeguards and boating and climbing instructors. And the number of college students applying for camp positions is way down too.
After a year of confinement, they want to spread their wings and, coming to camp and giving up some of that really wasn't that attractive for some.
Some international camp workers are finding their way into the U.S. by way of Mexico. That's where Irish native and head camp counselor Sean Yelverton got his visa.
We're talking total probably 15, 16 days.
But others, like Roxy Bradley, weren't so lucky. The UK native was a Camp IHC counselor before the pandemic, but this summer she was unable to get a visa to return.
I'm upset. I'm frustrated. I wish I could be there.
Lauren said to reopen this summer, she launched a website and social media campaign aimed at recruiting American college students to fill positions. It worked. She's found enough workers for now.
That the kids are going to come here and they are going to feel that everything is normal. But it was an absolute beast of a job getting to that point.
The camp directors and experts we spoke with say they're hopeful that these visa issues will be rectified by next summer. But in the meantime, they say the timing for this couldn't be worse. Camp directors are saying their phones are ringing off the hook as more families than ever are looking to send their kids back to the outdoors to have connections again with other campers. At the same time, this is also a summer when there just aren't enough camp workers to go around.
Coming up, it is open season on Amazon for all those highly anticipated Prime Day deals.
But you might run into a snag or two when filling up that shopping cart. We'll explain next.
Are you ready? Yes. Are you ready for a boost?